The chamber of the Galactic Council was a vast, luminescent hall suspended above the capital world of Xiphus Prime. Holographic war maps flickered in mid-air, displaying the brutal reality unfolding along the war front. The Zelvani Empire, a species bred for conquest, had shattered every defensive line the Council had thrown against them. Reports scrolled across the screens. Entire colonies lost, fleets reduced to debris, once thriving planets now cinders drifting in the void. Seated in a semicircle were the representatives of the Galactic Coalition, towering reptilian Torgath, warlords, the crystalline Zithians, and the coldly logical Valyrian strategists, among others. They had gathered to discuss the war's final grim phase. The room was tense, the air heavy with unspoken defeat. "The situation is untenable," High Commander Arvek of the Valerians stated, his synthesized voice devoid of emotion. "Even with our most advanced weapons, our fleets cannot hold the Zelvani back. Their forces adapt too quickly. Their war machine is relentless." A murmur of agreement spread among the council members. No species had been able to match the Zelvani's speed or raw aggression. Even the most battle-hardened generals admitted, privately at least, that the war's end was inevitable, and it would not end in their favor. Then, from the shadows, at the edge of the council chamber, a human representative stepped forward. He was unremarkable in stature, clad in a simple dark uniform. Unlike the other delegates who wore intricate ceremonial garments or shimmering battle regalia, he carried himself with the ease of someone who had seen the battlefield and no longer cared for ornamentation. His name was Ambassador Reed. "You are all missing the point," Reed said, his voice steady but edged with something unreadable. "You fight the Zelvani the way they expect you to. You throw technology at them. You attempt to outmaneuver them with predictable tactics. And you keep losing." Several council members bristled. The Torgath warlord bared his teeth in a silent snarl, while the Zithian delegate's crystalline form flickered with irritation. "And what do you propose?" "Human?" Arvek asked, his voice laced with skepticism. "More of your fleets? More of your automated combat units? Humanity has suffered the same defeats as the rest of us." Reed allowed himself a small, knowing smile. "No," he said simply. "You don't need more technology. You need something older, something the Zelvani don't expect. You need them." A new projection flared to life above the council chamber. At first glance, it appeared to be a roster of humans, grizzled, battle-worn, their faces lined with age. Some had cybernetic limbs, others bore the scars of past conflicts. A few leaned on canes, their bodies weathered by time. Confusion rippled through the chamber, followed swiftly by outrage. "This is an insult," the Torgath warlord spat. "You offer us old men? Veterans from wars fought before our species, even encountered humanity?" "A desperate ploy," the Zithian delegate muttered. "They would die within minutes." Reed did not waver. "Would they?" He gestured, and the projection shifted. Historical footage now, grainy but vivid. Humans, outnumbered, outgunned, surviving impossible odds through sheer cunning. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, battles won through deception, attrition, and an iron will. The council watched, silent. Reed continued. "The Zelvani are accustomed to modern warfare. They expect calculated strategies, data-driven battles. They do not expect the kind of war these men fought in. Total war, wars of attrition, wars where the only rule is survival." The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then Arvek spoke, his voice controlled but laced with doubt. "We have no choice but to consider unconventional solutions. But let it be understood, this is a last resort. If they fail, we lose everything. Reed nodded. Then it's a good thing they don't fail. The decision was made. The old soldiers were sent to the front. The planet Rylos IV was a graveyard. The Zelvani had turned it into a war zone, its once thriving jungles reduced to scorched ruin, its cities broken husks. The air was thick, with smoke, and the sky never cleared of the burning remnants of downed warships. The old soldiers arrived not in sleek battlecruisers, but in an ancient battered transport ship that groaned as it descended. When they disembarked, the younger, battle-hardened soldiers of the coalition watched them with open disdain. "They sent us relics," an alien officer muttered. One of the old men, a broad-shouldered figure with gray stubble and a jagged scar across his cheek, chuckled. "That's General Barnes to you, kid." He hoisted an outdated but well-maintained projectile rifle over his shoulder. "Where's the front?" Another veteran, missing an arm but carrying a modified plasma launcher, gave the surrounding soldiers a once-over. "Fancy armor. Bet none of you know how to dig a proper trench, though." The coalition officers looked to their commander, who sighed. "Give them the outermost sector. It won't hold anyway." No one expected them to survive the night. When the Zelvani attack came, it was unlike anything the younger soldiers had seen before. The old men didn't fight like modern armies. They didn't stand in organized ranks relying on shields and formations. Instead, they disappeared into the ruined landscape. They set traps, deadfalls, tripwires, explosives hidden under loose rubble. They fought with patience, taking their time, striking from the shadows. And they fought dirty. A Zelvani battalion stormed through a shattered city sector, expecting easy prey. Instead, they were met with chaos. Grenades detonated under their feet. Snipers, hidden in collapsed buildings, picked off commanders first. They found their own weapons turned against them, scavenged and repurposed. The enemy hesitated. This wasn't war as they understood it. This was something else. Something primal. By dawn, the sector was still held, by men who should have died decades ago. And the Galactic Council, watching the battle unfold from their distant chamber, fell into stunned silence. Dawn broke over the war-torn ruins of Rylos IV, but the battlefield remained shrouded in smoke. Fires still burned in the distance, casting long shadows over the shattered cityscape. The galactic forces had braced for a slaughter, expecting the old soldiers to be wiped out in the night's assault. Instead, the Zelvani had suffered their first unexpected defeat. Their bodies littered the streets, their weapons left abandoned. The veterans had not just survived. They had turned the battlefield into their hunting ground. General Barnes knelt beside a fallen Zelvani officer, prying a serrated blade from the corpse's clawed grip. He examined it with the keen eye of a man who had seen countless weapons in countless wars, then tucked it into his belt. Around him, his men moved with the efficiency of seasoned killers, gathering enemy ammunition, reinforcing makeshift barricades, setting more traps. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but that had never stopped them before. A young coalition officer approached hesitantly, his polished armor still unscathed by real battle. "General," he said, trying to mask his unease, "High Command wants a report on how you held Sector 9. Barnes didn't bother looking up. "Tell them we killed the enemy before they killed us." "That's not—" The officer hesitated as an older soldier walked past, dragging a Zelvani plasma rifle behind him. The weapon had been crudely modified, its power core stripped and rewired. "That's not standard issue," the officer remarked, frowning. The veteran snorted. "Son, standard issue don't mean a damn thing when you're fighting to live." Barnes finally looked up. His scarred face was impassive, but his eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "Listen, kid, you want to know how we held the sector?" He gestured around them. We don't fight like you do. You were trained for clean battles. We were trained to win by any means necessary." The officer's mouth opened, then closed. He had no response. Out in the ruins, the Zelvani were regrouping. They had underestimated the humans once, but they wouldn't make the same mistake twice. War cries echoed in the distance, guttural and rage-filled. Barnes stood, rolling his shoulders. "Round 2, he muttered. The attack came at midday, brutal and unrelenting. The Zelvani stormed the ruins, their forces triple what they had sent the night before. Plasma fire rained down, melting stone and metal alike. Coalition soldiers fought in defensive formations, but they were already breaking under the pressure. The line wouldn't hold. Barnes and his men didn't fight in a line. They vanished into the wreckage, moving through the ruins like ghosts. They struck where the enemy was weakest, hitting supply lines, cutting down officers, disappearing before retaliation could come. A Zelvani tank rumbled through the streets, its cannons vaporizing anything in its path. A moment later, it lurched, violently, explosions rocking its frame as it collapsed into a pit, an improvised trap made from a collapsed sewer line. The crew didn't even have time to scream before fire engulfed them. A Zelvani squad took cover in a burned-out building, expecting it to shield them from enemy fire. They didn't notice the tripwires. The moment their commander stepped forward, the explosives triggered. The entire structure collapsed, burying them under tons of debris. Psychological warfare followed. The old soldiers whispered over stolen Zelvani comm channels, using captured radios to spread misinformation. Enemy squads received orders that led them into kill zones. Others heard the voices of their dead, their own language thrown back at them in haunting, taunting echoes. The Zelvani began hesitating. These weren't normal enemies. They weren't soldiers. They were something else. Something far older, far more dangerous. As the sun dipped low, the battlefield fell eerily quiet. The Zelvani had stalled. Their front lines were in disarray, their forces exhausted. But the old men did not rest. Barnes crouched beside his second-in-command, a wiry man known simply as Rook. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand, a relic of some forgotten battle, but his grip on his rifle was steady. "They're rattled," Rook muttered. "Not used to bleeding like this." Barnes nodded. "They'll adapt." Rook smirked. "So will we." Beyond their position, the remaining coalition soldiers were watching. They had dismissed the old men at first, mocked them even. But now, after witnessing the carnage, their expressions had changed. There was no more doubt, only respect. A young alien soldier, barely out of his first deployment, approached cautiously. His voice wavered. How did you learn to fight like this?" Barnes regarded him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he pulled a battered metal tag from around his neck and tossed it over. The soldier caught it, frowning as he read the inscription. It was a name, a date. A war fought centuries ago, long before the Coalition had ever dreamed of encountering the Zelvani. "We learned," Barnes said simply, "the hard way." Night fell over the ruins. In the Zelvani war camp, the enemy was restless. They had never feared an opponent before. They had never doubted their own supremacy. Now, for the first time, they hesitated. For the first time, they were afraid. The night air on Rylos the Force was thick with the acrid scent of burned metal and scorched earth. Smoke coiled through the ruins like restless spirits, whispering through the broken streets where bodies, human and Zelvani alike, lay still. The war had reached a crossroads, a moment of fragile, terrible balance. The old soldiers had held the line, had done the impossible, but the enemy was not yet beaten. From their war camp beyond the ruined city, the Zelvani gathered in the thousands, their warlords snarling through bared fangs, their plasma blades glowing in the dark. The veterans had bloodied them, humiliated them, and for that, there would be no retreat. No negotiation, only annihilation. Barnes knelt on one knee atop a collapsed bridge, staring out at the enemy forces massing beyond the ruins. He listened, his weathered face unreadable, as Rook relayed reconnaissance reports. They're bringing in their heavy artillery. More tanks, aerial gunships, shock troops. This isn't just an attack, they're making an example of us. Barnes exhaled slowly, rubbing a calloused thumb along the scar on his jaw. Good, he murmured. Let them come. Rook arched an eyebrow. You got a plan, or are we just being stubborn? A slow grin spread across Barnes's face. Both. Below, among the younger coalition soldiers who had once dismissed them, the old men moved with quiet efficiency, preparing for what they all knew would be their final stand. Weapons were scavenged and repurposed, trenches deepened, explosives wired beneath the rubble in intricate patterns. The younger troops watched, listened, learned. A lieutenant from the Valerian command unit, his polished armor now scuffed and dented, approached Barnes hesitantly. Sir, he said, the word feeling strange in his mouth, I've been authorized to give you command of this sector. You and your men have proven that. He hesitated as if unwilling to say the next words. That we know what the hell we're doing, Barnes supplied dryly. The lieutenant nodded stiffly. Yes? Barnes clapped him on the shoulder. Took you long enough? Dawn broke in fire. The first Zelvani assault came like a storm, a tide of snarling warriors clad in dark armor, their energy weapons cutting through the ruins with merciless precision. But the old soldiers did not meet them head-on. They waited. A squad of Zelvani berserkers stormed a seemingly abandoned street, their claws dripping with anticipation. The ground beneath them erupted in fire as buried explosives turned the cobblestones into shrapnel, cutting them down before they could react. The survivors stumbled back, straight into the sights of Barnes's snipers, who put them down with quiet, efficient shots. On the western front, a Zelvani tank battalion rumbled forward, intent on flattening the makeshift defenses. Barnes had anticipated this. The moment the lead tank rolled over a pile of twisted debris, Rook triggered the detonator. A chain reaction of explosions tore through the ranks, flipping the massive war machines like children's toys. Survivors crawled from the wreckage, only to be met with hails of gunfire. The coalition soldiers, once skeptical of the veterans' brutal methods, fought with newfound ferocity. They had seen what the old men could do. They had learned that war was not about honor, about precision, about advanced tactics calculated by AIs in distant command centers. War was about survival, about ruthlessness, about knowing that the only rule that mattered was the one that left you standing at the end. For the first time since the war began, the Zelvani hesitated, but their pride would not allow them to retreat. From the rear lines, their warlords unleashed their final wave, their champions, their greatest warriors, creatures bred for nothing but destruction. Towering figures clad in spiked armor, wielding weapons that crackled with dark energy, they moved. With terrifying speed, cutting through the defenders like scythes through grain. Barnes saw the line faltering. He saw men breaking, falling back, the raw terror in their eyes. He clenched his jaw and rose from his cover, hefting his rifle. "On me!" he bellowed. His voice was not the bark of a modern officer giving tactical commands. It was a roar from the past, from the trenches of 1,000 wars, from a place where men did not fight for orders, but for the man standing beside them. The old soldiers rallied, moving as one, their aging bodies fueled by something deeper than strength, something primal. They met the Zelvani champions head-on, and the battlefield descended into chaos. Barnes drove his shoulder into a Zelvani warrior twice his size, knocking it off balance before firing point-blank into its chest. Rook took a plasma blade to the side, but drove his knife into his attacker's throat before the alien could finish the job. The battle became a blur of blood and fire, of ancient warriors proving that time had not dulled their instincts. Then, just as it seemed they would be overwhelmed, the sky split apart. Thunder rolled, not from nature, but from the arrival of something vast. Descending from the clouds came a fleet, not of sleek modern warships, but of old, battered military transports. Dropships, scarred by battles fought centuries ago, bearing the insignias of wars that history books had nearly forgotten. Reinforcements, but not the pristine, fresh-faced troops the coalition might have sent. More old men, more legends. They had heard the call, and they had come to finish the fight. The Zelvani, upon seeing them, finally knew fear. The battlefield of Rylos IV lay silent in the aftermath. Smoke still rose in dark plumes against the blood-red sky, drifting over the shattered remains of what had once been a city. The war was over, at least this part of it. The Zelvani had retreated, not in an orderly withdrawal, but in the mindless flight of an army that had lost something far greater than a battle. They had lost their certainty, their belief in their own invincibility. Barnes stood atop a crumbling wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his body aching in a way only the old truly understood. His men moved below, tending to the wounded, salvaging what they could. The younger coalition soldiers, the ones who had once dismissed them as relics, now worked alongside them without hesitation. There were no more divisions, no more doubts. Rook sat on the edge of a wrecked Zelvani tank, binding a crude bandage around his wounded side. He winced but grinned through the pain. "Damn good fight," he muttered. "Almost makes me wish I was young again." Barnes snorted. "You'd just be dumber." Rook laughed, a deep, rough sound that turned into a cough. He spat blood onto the dust. "Worth it." A shadow fell over them. The young Valerian lieutenant from before, his once immaculate armor now battle-worn, stood at attention. He no longer carried himself with the stiff formality of an officer who had only known war through tactics and simulations. He had seen. The truth of it now, had fought in the mud and the blood, and it showed in his eyes. "We owe you our lives," the lieutenant said, voice steady. "The coalition owes you everything." Barnes looked at him, then at the battlefield, at the dead, human, alien, friend, foe. "No," he said simply. "You owe us nothing. We were never here to be owed anything." The lieutenant hesitated. "Then, why did you come? Why fight, when you could have lived out your days in peace?" Barnes glanced at Rook, who only chuckled. Then he looked at the sky, where the remnants of the old war fleet still hovered. Ships piloted by men who had outlived their time, who should have been resting, but had instead chosen to stand one last time. Because, Barnes said quietly, some wars never end. The coalition brass arrived a day later, descending in pristine ships that had never seen true battle. They walked among the ruins with carefully neutral expressions, surveying the cost of the victory. High Command tried to frame it as a triumph of strategy, a coordinated effort of the Galactic Council's military might. But the soldiers on the ground knew better. There was no grand parade, no speeches, just a quiet understanding that something had changed. The Zelvani had been beaten, not by superior firepower, not by technological advancements, but by something older, something they had never prepared for. The veterans left in the same battered transports they had arrived in. Some stayed, helping to rebuild, training the next generation. Others simply disappeared, vanishing into the vastness of space, their names destined to fade into legend. As Barnes and Rook boarded their ship, the young lieutenant stood at the foot of the ramp, unsure of what to say. In the end, he simply saluted. Barnes didn't salute back. Instead, he gave the lieutenant a slow nod. "Try not to forget," he said. Then, without another word, the old soldiers left, carrying with them the weight of the past and the knowledge that, when the galaxy called again, they would be ready.